He's expressing what I feel inside today, but he's letting it out and crying. So, I do not like Memorial Day. I'm not a big fan of it. And for those of us who have actually lost friends and family in combat, today's a rough day for us. Oh, I apologize. I'll take my sunglasses off so you guys can watch me cry today. So, we're going to get through this together. I personally, I don't go to church. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ, don't get me wrong, but I rarely attend church, and we can have a one-on-one conversation about that later. But the last 2 weeks, I decided that I'm going to dress up, and I am going to go to church for the sole purpose of finding a husband. Not gonna lie. Look, it's Memorial Day weekend. There's a lot of visitors in town. My chances are pretty good right now, right? So, yesterday I went to church. And for those of you who don't know Pastor Andrew Hobbs, he spoke. And in the beginning, he shared a couple of scripture verses. And one of them really stuck. I did focus on the whole sermon, but I couldn't stop thinking about this verse. And it's in Matthew 5:4, and it says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Blessed are those who mourn. When it comes to my personal family, I've only mourned 4 times for grandparents, and they died of old age, so that was a different type of mourning process. But as far as military friends, I have mourned 22 times. And it's hard to feel blessed because of that. I've shared this story. I'm just going to briefly share it because it ties into what I'm talking about today. So, back in 2011, in one day, 16 of my friends were killed on the same day. And at the time, I was stationed in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And there was only about, I'd say, 10 of them that were buried at Arlington Cemetery. The rest their families had buried throughout the United States. So every weekend, I would drive up to Arlington National Cemetery because it was about a 3.5-hour drive, no traffic. So I would go and I would stare at headstones and I would talk to dead people. I was searching. I was searching for something. I was hoping that they would talk back. I was hoping that they would tell me that they were going to be my protectors for the rest of my life, that they would tell me what the rest of my life would hold, that they would tell me to stop dating Navy SEALs. Something, just something. So I would go up there. So for 3 years in a row, I would do this. Crazy, right? So one day, they finally talked back. And they said, "Jen, stop coming up here. Move on with your life. Remember our lives, but forget our death." I have this right here. It's a black bracelet. For those of you who don't know what this is, if you ever see somebody with a black bracelet, it's got etching on it. And what it is it's a memorial bracelet. And in the military, we wear these to remember our friends who were killed in combat. And as I said, I've had 22 friends who were killed. And up until this point, I was like, I'm not going to get a bracelet because I'm not going to wear 22 of them, obviously. But I finally decided to go ahead and get this bracelet, and it has one man's name on it. And the reason that I chose him is not because he's more special than anybody else, but it's because this man was an active part in the most important decision I ever made in my entire life. And I look at this bracelet, and not to specifically remind me of him, but to remind me of that decision that I made. At the end of the speech, if I remember, I'll tell you what that decision was. So, I was very blessed by the Islander this week. You see, 2 years ago, I wrote an article, and the Islander has been asking me to write veteran stories, and I've been slacking and not. So I sent them a story, and they published it this Friday. For those of you who didn't read it, it's in this week's Islander. You can read it up until Thursday. And that's a little bit of what I'm going to share today. So for those of you who've already read it, sorry, you kind of know the story. So when I went through that transitioning period of no longer going up to Arlington National Cemetery every weekend, this was in 2015. And I was still in the military, but I had also put myself through massage therapy school. So I was working a couple of days a week as a massage therapist. Well, one day, this older gentleman comes, never met him before, and he's my client for the day. And you could tell just by looking at him that he was in the military before. Not just because his "I'm a veteran" hat said so, but his demeanor, the way he presented himself. So, as a massage therapist, you stay neutral. You don't talk about your life. Like, I never told him I was in the military, anything like that. You just facilitate, you massage. If they want to talk, you let them talk. Well, this guy likes to talk a lot. So he talked. He had just had surgery 2 months prior, and he had an 8-inch scar on his hip. And it was thick and nasty, painful. And he said to me, I'm not sure if there's anything you can do about this. Go ahead and work on it if you can. So I gently worked on his scar. And at the end, he told me, he's like, "Wow, I'm shocked. It didn't hurt." I was like, "Okay, good." So from then on, he continued to book with me every week, the exact same day, the exact same time, weekly. Well, after a while, we started building this like relationship with each other. He started opening up to me and talking to me about things. He started talking about his military service. He had been in Vietnam. He was a retired naval officer. And then I don't even know what prompted it, but he started talking to me about things that he had never talked to anybody else about before. And those were the hard stories of friends killed in combat, the hard stories of not being able to save people. So, and still here I am feeling like a liar now because I haven't even told this guy that I'm in the military and I can relate to this. But there was like this interesting healing process that went on. He got to talk about what was going on in him, and I got to process what was going on inside of me, and kind of it helped me heal some of the hurt that I had as well. So if you read the story, the title is called "Searching for Lieutenant John." You see, Rich, I don't know if I told you that his name's Rich, Commander Rich Richards, he was stationed in Guam. He was a navigator on an aircraft. They flew a lot of missions in Vietnam. They also did stops in the Philippines. They just kind of did this route of Guam, Vietnam, Philippines thing. I don't, off the top of my head, know the exact base. I apologize. You can read it in the story. But there was this one base that he was assigned to, and he was in the Navy, and the perimeter guard was Marines, and the commander of that base was a Marine colonel. And the Marine colonel came up to Rich one day and said, "Hey, I have this lieutenant that I need for you to give a ride next time you go back to Guam. He needs to get home to his family. Could you, get him on your aircraft?" And Rich said, "Yes, definitely, I'll do it." So that was the first time that he met John. Throughout the course of his time in Vietnam, the colonel would continually come up and say, "Hey, I need you to give John a ride again. Can you get him on?" And he would get him on. Well, John and Rich had a lot in common because they both had 2 children. Their children were both infant and toddlers. They were both officers. They both had families in Guam, and they were both in Vietnam going through a rough time. For those of you who are there, you know better than I do. So John and Rich built this great relationship. At one point in time, John convinced Rich to take an aircraft and actually go to Japan to go buy some speakers, which, I mean, his wife knows now, but at that time they did not tell their wives. And they had this great friendship. So one day the colonel came up to Rich and said, hey, this is the part where Jen's not going to cry. So the colonel said, I need you to take John home. And it's not like the other times, because John was killed. And Rich had to take one of his good friends home to his final resting place. It's all in the story. You guys can read it. You guys can cry again and read that. But, so Rich told me this as I'm massaging him, trying not to cry while I'm massaging him, and he's telling me this heart devastating story. And he said to me that he will not go to the wall in Washington, D.C., the wall where all of the names of those killed in action are. Because he said he doesn't know John's last name. And he doesn't know where John's buried. All he knows is that he's just this guy named John. And he says until he can figure that out, he will not go up to Washington, D.C. and see this wall. And I asked him, and I said, well, I mean, in the military, we all go by last names. How do you not know his last name? Like, how do you not know any of this? And he said, I just blocked it out of my mind, and I wanted to forget. So I asked him, well, what is it you're looking for? What is it you are searching for? And he said, I'm searching for closure. I want this part of my life, like, closed out and done. So he's been holding on to that, what, 50 years? It's been since Vietnam. 50 years. He's like in his 80s, I think, now. So this was 2 years ago that I actually wrote this article, and this was the first time it was published. And since then, Rich and I have stayed in contact. And I remember the conversation clearly when I finally moved back to Catalina and I was about to retire, and I was like, so Rich, FYI, I'm also in the military. I'm like, sorry, I didn't mean to lie to you or anything. It just, it didn't come up. So we've created this special bond with each other. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I talked to Rich on the phone, and he said to me, we were talking about this article, and I said, I think during the Memorial Day speech, I want to talk about it. It's a good story. And he said to me, you know what? I don't even need to find John anymore. I was like, well, why is that? And he said, because you helped me heal and get through and talk out all of this stuff that I don't need that closure anymore. It just doesn't matter anymore. So back to this bracelet. For me, myself, when I was going to Arlington, I was searching for that, searching for something, searching for closure, I guess, not really closure, more wanting these people to still be alive. And the interesting thing is this, the man whose name is on this bracelet, it is not through the time that he was alive on this earth that I made that very important decision. It was through his death. Because he died, I started seeking the answers to life. What is my purpose here? What am I doing here? And I started seeking out the possibility of there being a God. And it is because this man died that I did this, not when he was living. Which, coincidentally enough, it is because Jesus died that that I made that decision, and I made the decision to give my life to Christ. So back to the scripture that I started with, blessed are those who mourn. I thought about this long and hard over the last 24 hours since yesterday's service. And I feel like I am truly blessed. You know, I mourn the loss of my friends who were service members as well. But because of their death, I am now blessed because God's the one comforting me now. So, that is the conclusion of my service. Not the service, but my story, part of it at least. So, like I said, it's in the Islander. If you want to read the story about Rich, you can go ahead and pick it up. So, Mark?